So Dragon Age: The Veilguard has shipped. What's going to happen at BioWare now? I guess up front I should say that I have every confidence that Mass Effect is in fact being worked on and that that project is going to receive all of the support from EA that it might need. But I think it's worth asking how that's going to look structurally. To answer that, I think to start, it's worth taking a step back and looking at BioWare since its inception, looking at the different ways that BioWare has existed throughout its history, because we're entering into an unprecedented time for BioWare. As a result, it's a little hard to see exactly what's going to happen. Someone in my community made this very nice graphic showing the flow of people throughout BioWare's history. These are my flows, and they're pretty fuzzy, but I think they serve to illustrate my points. The 4 numbers along the side of this graphic represent what I consider to be the 4 most important events that aren't shipping games that affected BioWare. Those are the purchase of BioWare by Elevation Partners, the purchase of BioWare by EA, when Ray and Greg left BioWare, and then 2017, which I will make a video on eventually, which I think is the year that had the largest impact on BioWare in the modern day. When I look at this graphic, what I see are 4 different phases of BioWare's strategy. And those overlap and those fuzz together for sure. It's still illustrative of where we are and where we may be going. In the early days of BioWare, I'm going to define this period as the grow period. This is from BioWare's creation up until somewhere in between the Elevation Partners purchase in 2005 and the EA purchase in 2009. This is the grow period of BioWare, when a project was strapped for resources, when it was running into trouble. The typical response was to add more people. The company grew very rapidly in this period. I joined in 1997. I was employee number 35. By the time we're coming out the other side of this phase, we're well over 200 people. The philosophy of the organization seemed to be have a lot of things going on that are all potentially going to bring in money. There are a lot of games in development. We have a lot of different product lines going on. In the early days, we even had an animation group working on Be Alert Bert. Philosophically, there was a belief in safety through redundancy, in having a lot of irons in the fire so that if something wasn't working, something else could cover for that. We have the Shattered Steel group turning into the MDK group, turning into the KOTOR group, turning into the Mass Effect group. You have Baldur's Gate turning into Dragon Age Origins, but some of those people moving on to Baldur's Gate DLC, that's where I went, and then moving on to Jade Empire. At the peak, we have essentially 6 different product lines going on at once. We have Star Wars: The Old Republic in Austin. We have the Javelin/Agent group in Montreal. We have the Mass Effect team in Edmonton. We still have people working on Neverwinter content in Edmonton. We have the Dragon Age Origins team. We have the handheld team working on Sonic Chronicles, and we have the Revolver team working on Jade Empire 2/Revolver. So 7 different potential products, all in development, I believe simultaneously. I might be a little off on the overlap of the Neverwinter expansions with some of the other things, but 6 or 7 different product lines going on all at once, all seen as potential games that can ship, all seen as potential revenue sources. As we reach the end of this phase, the studio is getting pretty squeezed for money. This is the period where first BioWare gets purchased by Elevation Partners. and then ultimately gets purchased by EA. And as this happens, both because of being purchased by a large multinational publicly traded company, but also because of the financial constraints that were coming in at the end of this phase, we move from a philosophy of growth, of the way to be secure is to constantly add more people, add more product lines, do more, into a phase that I'm going to call the consumption phase. Very rapidly in 2008, we go from 7 things going on at once down to 3. Star Wars: The Old Republic continues, first to ship and then ultimately to enter its ongoing long live phase. The Javelin Agent team goes away. Most of those resources end up going on to Mass Effect. That team then forms the core of the Mass Effect Andromeda team. But the Javelin Agent line ends. The handheld team ceases to be. The Revolver team ceases to be. So we're down to just Mass Effect, Dragon Age, and Star Wars: The Old Republic for a time. This influx or concentration of resources gets BioWare into a phase that was relatively stable for a while. And there's a brief period of time when BioWare ships a bunch of things. Mass Effect 2, Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age Awakening, Dragon Age 2, and Mass Effect 3 shipped really close together. BioWare was effectively and successfully running 2 product lines simultaneously. I would argue, however, this was burning up the extra fat that was in the organization. It was consuming and living off the other projects that it had eaten in 2008. So as we're coming out of Mass Effect 3, everything at first seems like it's working that same way. We are able to run multiple projects at a time. The organization is talking about being able to ship a game a year because we've done it before. So we should be able to structure the studio in such a way to do that again. But as we approach Dragon Age Inquisition, as we start trying to ship that game, the cracks start to show. It starts to become clear that projects are taking more resources to ship, that we aren't able to ship a game every single year, that we need greater resource concentration on the next project that's coming out. I don't know this, but I believe one of the reasons that Casey Hudson probably left originally in 2014 is what he was seeing was the first signs of the cracks showing here. He was leading Dylan, which eventually became Anthem, and he was not getting the resources that he felt he needed to get that project going. And when he looked at the priority order of ship, what he saw were 2 other big games in front of him. First, Inquisition, that was coming out pretty soon, but then right behind it, Mass Effect Andromeda, which was, again, going to probably take resources away from him. And certainly this is exactly what I also experienced after Dragon Age Inquisition did ship, is that it was immensely difficult to find resources if you weren't the next project out. As we move from Sustain into Contract, we also start to see a dramatic reduction in the amount of DLC that is built. Dragon Age Origins has way more than the amount of DLC that either Dragon Age 2 or Dragon Age Inquisition had. Mass Effect Andromeda has basically no DLC. DLC is a safety valve for your processes, for your staff, a place for people to work when other projects aren't quite ready for them, a place for you to grow your next generation of leaders. As this disappears, you lose both of those things. So we find ourselves in this 4th phase. I'm going to call it Contract, because what effectively was happening, even though maybe BioWare didn't realize it yet, is that the number of projects that they were capable of running simultaneously was going down. And it was going down fractionally, slowly, so that at first it wasn't really obvious that that's what was happening. Why was this happening? It was happening for a couple of different reasons. First of all, projects were getting more expensive. The cost of resources was going up, so you needed more people or more time to make an individual asset. But also we'd essentially burned off all of the reserves that had existed from that grow phase. That consumption phase, and then a sort of honeymoon period where we had nothing left to consume, but we were coasting on the resources we had, that was over. Now there was no growth. The studio was basically fixed size. Actually, it will get a bit smaller in a second here, and had to exist within its own envelope. First, in 2013 and 2014, we see Anthem being starved out by Dragon Age and Andromeda. Andromeda being, in part, somewhat starved out by Dragon Age as well. So now we ship Dragon Age Inquisition, and Mass Effect Andromeda is in the driver's seat. And it is consuming most of the resources within the organization. As we go into 2016, late 2016, early 2017, we have a push to ship Mass Effect Andromeda. And as part of that, we see the first of what I'm going to call a leadership discontinuity. So I, as leader on Dragon Age, actually lead a team of Dragon Age people onto Mass Effect Andromeda to help them ship. This isn't unique in that it represents a large flow of people. We'd seen that in the past, definitely in this time period. To ship Dragon Age Inquisition, there was a flow of people. It was pulling resources off of the other projects. But the thing that marks this as different is that this was the first time when there was senior leadership moving off of the project they led onto another project in an effort to help it ship. It wasn't super long, it was only a few months, but it represented a change in philosophy in terms of the way that the projects were run. Way back in the past, we saw some of this. We saw leaders helping in the last few weeks of a project to push it across the finish line. But here, what we had was a project actually intentionally removing its leader in order to help another project finish. After Mass Effect Andromeda ships, and then Casey Hudson comes back and he is now leading BioWare, we have a much, much larger leadership discontinuity with Anthem. Now, when Mass Effect Andromeda shipped, the Montreal studio was supposed to come over onto Joplin, was supposed to help kickstart that project. But instead, the Montreal studio ended up getting taken away and given to the leadership in Montreal. If the plan had gone forward, if Joplin had been able to incorporate the staff that it was waiting for, would things have gone differently? Certainly they would have. I don't know that even still, BioWare was really in a place where it was going to be able to ship Anthem and Joplin simultaneously, but certainly the loss of the Montreal studio basically made that an impossibility. 3/4 of the senior leadership on Dragon Age Joplin move on to Anthem or leave the studio completely, but Dragon Age continues. It becomes Morrison. And this leadership discontinuity certainly has massive consequences to Dragon Age. But this is a hint of things to come, because as we move from 2017 to 2019 and Anthem ships, in 2021, 2022, we do this again in the opposite direction. The leadership team moves on to Dragon Age to help that project ship. But in that case, it was done in a different way. Rather than leaving some of the team in place and moving the leadership across, what was done in this case was everyone moved. Ceased to exist for all intents and purposes for a 15-month period to help Dragon Age to ship. What we see in 2016 and 2017 is a brief gap in leadership to help Andromeda ship. But then that turns into a large gap in leadership to ship Anthem, which turns into a complete gap in project for Mass Effect to help Veilguard ship. Effectively, in arguably the most slow and painful way possible, BioWare is figuring out that it simply can't do more than one project at a time anymore. I think there is power in admitting what you're doing and definitely it's a lot safer to not allow a project to run without leadership. And then a second thing also happens. In 2023, Star Wars The Old Republic is moved outside of the EA organization. It's given to Broadsword to run. And that team ceases to exist within BioWare. So what happens in 2023? For the first time since arguably 1995, maybe not even then, is BioWare is only working on a single project, which is Dragon Age The Veilguard. There's nobody working on Star Wars The Old Republic. There's no one working on Mass Effect. There's no one working on any side projects or remasters or anything like that. Everyone is singularly focused upon Dragon Age The Veilguard. And now The Veilguard has shipped. And right now, there might be people still working on cleaning up and doing final patches and things like that. But once that's done, there's no plans for DLC. There's only Mass Effect. So everyone at BioWare will be working on Mass Effect. But of course, Mass Effect isn't ready to suddenly have a team of 250, 300 people working on it. In the past, when BioWare was toying with being just one project, like on Anthem, like on the Veilguard, that project was up and running at full speed. So it was able to suck in every available resource. It had enough existing infrastructure that it was able to absorb everything. So that's not exactly what's happening. You see this when you go onto people's social media profiles. People who worked on Dragon Age The Veilguard, some of them are moving over to Mass Effect, but some of them are moving into other parts of the EA organization because Mass Effect isn't ready for them. In the past, the plan, this many irons in the fire strategy, was to make sure there was always something for people to do, that there was always work to be done. One of the side effects of that, of course, was that you were always slightly out of balance. So you would end up being short. And in the early days, the solution to that was to grow. In the later days, in the consumption phase, the solution to that was to eat all the other projects. But now there isn't things for other people to do. There is a need to find other work for them within the rest of the EA organization. While the Mass Effect team figures out what Mass Effect is going to be, figures out the structure, and then gets ready to ramp up to a much bigger team size. And this might be great because what it means is that BioWare, for the first time really ever, is able to singularly focus on a single project, is able to put all of its attention on a single project, is able to put everything it has towards a single goal, which is making the best Mass Effect it possibly can. The thing that remains to be seen is whether or not BioWare will be able to get its people back when it looks for them, when it's ready, when it wants to add people, if those people will be close at hand, if they will be easily removed from wherever they are being temporarily placed. And there's a couple of reasons why that might prove difficult. The first is that it's always hard to let go of people. If I loan a level artist to another project within the EA organization, unless that project has shipped at a conveniently perfect time, they still probably need that level artist. They've integrated them into their planning. That level is running slightly behind. They need someone to fix bugs, whatever. It's hard to give someone up. It's very difficult for projects to release people before they ship. And if they aren't shipping, it's going to be hard to get people back. Maybe that's all factored in, maybe that's all planned for, but it has a very high probability to prove difficult to get projects to shed people before they're actually done. And then if they do finish and Mass Effect isn't ready for them, they're going to have to go somewhere else. And you just start that whole problem over again. The other problem potentially is the people themselves. If I am a BioWare employee and I'm temporarily on the big head kart racing game, maybe I love that big head kart racing game. Maybe I want to stay on that project. So when Mass Effect comes looking to pull me back, maybe I say no. Maybe I try to switch over permanently onto this other project. And this might prove to be a bigger issue for more senior people, because if I'm looking to advance in my career at a relatively senior level, I'm going to want to be integrated pretty deeply into a project. If the project is reluctant to use me because they know they only have me temporarily, and they don't want me leading a pod, they don't want me leading a feature because of that, that's going to mean that my career is potentially treading water for a while. At the less senior levels, that's much less of a concern because that integration isn't as tight. It's easier to allow someone to build an asset, and hopefully they either finish that asset or at least they get it to somewhere where it is able to be handed off. But if the person is owning an entire section of your game, it's much harder to let them go. So if you know that they are going to go, you're less likely to give them that control in the first place. So if I'm interested in my career advancement, then I'm more likely to say, I want to be on this project forever so that I can potentially see that advancement. Even if I'm not really that interested in the big head kart racing game, I might still throw all my weight into moving permanently onto that project, simply to give myself as many opportunities as possible. But alternatively, this might be all upside for BioWare. This degree of focus that it hasn't ever had before might be exactly what it needs, might be exactly what's going to move it into the next phase of greatness. And maybe EA is going to prove to be incredibly effective at moving people around. And when Mass Effect looks to start to grow, maybe there will be no troubles. Maybe it will be able to do that seamlessly, and the entire process will go off without a hitch. You could argue that what is happening right now is essentially spreading this diversification that was such a big part of BioWare's earlier days across all of EA. And if that can be done successfully, a larger organization can help with that diversification, that ability to hold people and keep them working and flowing them around. In theory, a larger organization should be able to do that better than a smaller organization. Hopefully, that's exactly what happens. We will probably have hints of what's going on within the next 2 years. For now, I hope that's what's going on, because now we are in the 5th phase, and arguably we've been there for more than a year now, which is one game to rule them all, where BioWare is now a single project studio. Doesn't mean it's only going to ever make Mass Effects. It just means that it is, at this point in time, only working on one game at a time. And hopefully that focus, hopefully that able to concentrate on a single game at a time is going to help BioWare propel itself into the future. A special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you are interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that down in the description. As well, we have a Patreon if you are interested in joining that way. People who join the Patreon or the YouTube channel will get access to our Discord if you are interested in a bit of more community around this channel. Does this chart, does this graph give you a new insight into BioWare? Do you see the same phases that I do? Do you see something else? I have high hopes for Mass Effect. I think that once they figure out staffing, BioWare being focused on one game at a time is probably great for the studio. It's good. There's going to be some growing pains to get there, I suspect. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments. I will see you again soon. Thank you.